The life of Perseus. The story of Perseus begins not in triumph but in shadows, in the chambers of fear and prophecy. Long before he lifted a sword or touched the winged sandals of Hermes, his life was shaped by the words of an oracle and the cruelty of a king. Perseus, king of Argos, was a man haunted by fate. Though he possessed a kingdom, though he sat upon a throne of marble and gold, he was tormented by a single truth: he had no male heir. His only child was a daughter, Danae, a woman whose beauty shone like moonlight on still water. Perseus went to Delphi, seeking the wisdom of the oracle, hoping the gods might grant him a son. But the oracle's words struck him like thunder. "You will have no son, Perseus. But your daughter's son will one day kill you." Fear twisted his heart. He did not rejoice when Danae grew into womanhood, nor when suitors came to seek her hand. Instead, he saw her as a vessel of doom. To prevent the prophecy, Perseus ordered a great bronze chamber to be built beneath the palace, sealed from sky and sea. Into this prison of polished metal, he locked Danae away, believing no man and no god could reach her. But fate is not so easily chained. Zeus, king of the gods, looked upon Danae and was captivated by her radiance. No prison, no bronze wall, could deny him. He descended in a shower of golden light, a rain of brilliance that fell into Danae's chamber. From that divine union a child was conceived. When the baby boy was born, his cries echoed against bronze walls like the tolling of destiny. Danae named him Perseus. Perseus' fear turned to fury when he discovered the child. Yet he dared not kill his daughter or her son outright, for he feared the wrath of Zeus. Instead, he devised another cruelty. Placing Danae and the infant Perseus into a wooden chest, he ordered them cast into the sea. Waves carried the coffin like a toy, tossing it through storms, yet Danae held her child close, whispering prayers. At last, the chest washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, where a kind fisherman named Dictys found them and offered shelter. Perseus grew on Seriphos, not as a prince in marble halls, but as a humble boy among fishermen. He learned to climb rocks slick with spray, to cast nets into churning waters, to wrestle with the strength of the sea itself. Dictys treated him as a son, and Danae's love guided him. He grew tall and strong, his eyes bright with the fire of youth, his arms hardened by labor. Though he was unaware of his divine blood, he carried within him the spark of Olympus. But peace rarely lasts where destiny waits. Polydectes, king of Seriphos and brother to Dictys, cast his gaze upon Danae. He desired her beauty, but Perseus stood as her protector. Though young, Perseus had the courage of a lion and would not allow his mother to be taken by force. Polydectes, sly and cruel, bided his time. One day, the king announced a feast in honor of Hippodamia, claiming he wished to win her hand with the gift of a horse. Each man was expected to bring a horse as tribute. But Perseus, who owned no horse, stood With mocking words, he declared, "If you have no horse to offer, then bring me instead the head of Medusa, whose gaze turns men to stone." The court laughed, but Perseus, burning with pride, accepted the challenge. He did not know the weight of his words then. Medusa was no ordinary foe. She was one of the Gorgons, sisters with serpents for hair, whose eyes could freeze any living thing. Many heroes had sought her, and all had perished. Yet Perseus had sworn before a king, and a hero's oath cannot be broken. Alone and troubled, Perseus wandered to the shore, uncertain of his fate. There, the gods who had watched his life unfold revealed themselves. Athena, goddess of wisdom, came to him in gleaming armor, her eyes sharp with clarity. Hermes, fleet-footed messenger, alighted beside her with a smile as swift as wind. "You cannot face Medusa without aid," Athena said, her voice as steady as stone. She gave him a polished shield, shining like a mirror. "Look not upon her face directly. Use this to see without being seen." Hermes offered a curved sword, sharp as a breath, light as thought. "This blade will not fail you. Take also my sandals, which bear wings, so that you may fly." Grateful, Perseus bowed low. But the gods had more counsel. To find Medusa, he must seek the Graeae, the three ancient sisters who shared one eye between them. Perseus set out, sandals lifting him above cliffs and rivers, carrying him over seas. At last, he found the Graeae huddled in a cave, their hair like cobwebs, their voices raspy with age. As they passed their single eye from hand to hand, Perseus snatched it away. Blind and wailing, they begged him for its return. "Not until you tell me where the Gorgons dwell," Perseus demanded. In fear, they revealed the secret path to the land of eternal night, where Medusa lay. Only then did he return their eye and depart. The journey was long, and dread thickened with every mile. The land of the Gorgons was a desolation, filled with statues, heroes frozen mid-strike, animals caught mid-leap, whole armies reduced to stone. Perseus' heart pounded, but he remembered Athena's gift. Raising the polished shield, he gazed not at Medusa directly but at her reflection. There she lay, monstrous and mournful, serpents writhing upon her head, wings folded across her back. Even in her horror, there was a tragic beauty, for Medusa had once been mortal, cursed by Athena's wrath. But Perseus could not falter. Guided by the shield, he crept closer. The serpents hissed, their tongues flickering, but Medusa slept. With one swift motion, Perseus raised Hermes' sword and struck. The blade sliced clean, and Medusa's head fell, her scream echoing even in death. From her neck sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a warrior born of her blood. Perseus seized the head, wrapping it in a pouch so its gaze could harm no one but his enemies. No sooner had he taken his prize than the other Gorgons awoke. Their cries tore the night, their wings beat with fury. Perseus leapt into the air, the sandals of Hermes bearing him aloft. He flew swift as lightning, clutching his terrible trophy, while the Gorgons pursued with vengeance. Yet no matter how fast they flew, Hermes' sandals were swifter. At last, Perseus escaped into the clouds, leaving their fury behind. Triumphant, he began his journey home. But fate, ever weaving, had more trials in store. As he flew across distant lands, he came to the coast of Ethiopia, where cries rose above the surf. Chained to a rock by the sea was a maiden, her hair tangled in the wind, her eyes bright with terror. From the waves surged a monstrous sea beast, jaws wide to devour her. This was Andromeda, daughter of King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia. Her mother, boasting of her beauty, had angered the sea nymphs, and Poseidon had sent the beast as punishment. Only Andromeda's sacrifice could appease it. But Perseus, seeing her, felt his heart struck. Without hesitation, he drew forth Medusa's head from its pouch. As the beast lunged, Perseus held the severed head aloft. Its eyes blazed, and in an instant, the creature turned to stone, frozen forever in the crashing surf. The people cried out in wonder, and Cepheus offered Andromeda's hand in gratitude. She became Perseus' bride, her chains broken, her life renewed. Together, they returned to Seriphos, where another trial awaited. When Perseus returned to Seriphos, the air of the island was thick with unease. Word of his quest had already spread, carried by fishermen and merchants who sailed the seas. Yet the king, Polydectes, did not rejoice. He had never expected Perseus to survive. In his heart, he had hoped the boy would perish, leaving Danae unprotected. Perseus found his mother in hiding. Polydectes had grown more insistent during his absence, pressing Danae to yield to him, and only the kindness of Dictys had shielded her from the king's pursuit. The sight stoked the fire in Perseus' chest. He had not faced the Gorgon and crossed the seas to return to a coward's tyranny. Polydectes summoned his court to witness Perseus' return. With mocking words, he demanded proof of the impossible boast. "If you have truly slain Medusa, show us her head." A silence fell across the hall. Nobles and soldiers leaned forward, expecting a boy's bluff. But Perseus did not falter. With a steady hand, he reached into the pouch and drew forth the head of Medusa. The serpent still writhed upon it, the eyes still glowed with dreadful power. Before Polydectes could react, Perseus raised the head high. In an instant, the king and all his courtiers were turned to stone. Their faces froze in expressions of disbelief and terror, their bodies rigid in eternal judgment. The hall became a gallery of statues, silent and cold. Perseus lowered the head, wrapping it once more. Justice had been served. With Polydectes gone, Dictys was named king of Seriphos, a ruler just in kind. Danae was safe at last, her son standing as her protector, no longer the boy who had once washed ashore in a wooden chest. But Perseus' story did not end with triumph. Like all heroes touched by the gods, his path stretched far, woven with threads of fate he could not escape. With Andromeda at his side, Perseus journeyed to Argos, seeking reconciliation with his grandfather, Acrisius. Yet the memory of the oracle haunted Acrisius still. When he learned that Perseus lived and drew near, fear consumed him. He fled Argos and went into exile, unwilling to face the prophecy that had long stalked him. For a time, Perseus reigned peacefully, and tales of his adventures spread across Greece. Yet destiny is patient, and prophecies are relentless. At a festival in Larissa, games were held in honor of the dead. Perseus, wishing to honor the traditions of heroes, entered the contests. In the discus throw, his arm was strong and sure. But fate had chosen this moment. The discus veered off course, striking an old man among the spectators. The man fell, lifeless, and when Perseus rushed to his side, horror filled him, for the man was Acrisius, his grandfather. The oracle's words had been fulfilled. Though Perseus had not sought his death, though his hand had not been raised in malice, the prophecy had found its way. Grief struck him, heavier than any labor. He buried Acrisius with honor, yet he could not remain in Argos. The blood of kin called for exile. Perseus departed once more, carrying with him the weight of destiny. He traveled to Tiryns, where he founded a new line of kings. There, his descendants would rise in power, and among them would be Heracles, the greatest of all Greek heroes, born of Perseus' blood. Through him, Perseus' legacy endured, not only in stone and story but in living flesh. Yet before Perseus laid down his sword, his deeds multiplied. The head of Medusa, terrible and potent, was given to Athena, who placed it upon her shield, the aegis. With it, she struck fear into gods and giants alike. Pegasus, born of Medusa's blood, soared through the heavens, a symbol of inspiration to poets and warriors. And Perseus himself, though mortal, became more than a man. His story was etched into constellations, stars shining with his name. Andromeda too was placed among them, bound forever to the night sky beside her rescuer. When mortals looked upward, they saw their tale written in light, a reminder that even the sea's cruelty and the gods' wrath could be overcome by courage. Yet courage, in Perseus' life, was never born of ease. He had known imprisonment before birth, exile in infancy, poverty in youth. He had faced monsters of flesh and monsters of men. He had carried the burden of prophecy, the weight of God's meddling, the shadow of fate. And still, he had risen. That was the truth of his legend. Perseus' name spread far beyond Greece. To the people of later ages, he became the model of the hero, clever as well as strong, bold yet reverent to the gods. Unlike many who fell to pride, Perseus remembered gratitude. He honored Athena and Hermes for their aid, he gave his trophies to those who had helped him, and he bowed to fate even when it struck him cruelly. In this balance of humility and heroism lay his greatness. But let us step closer to the man himself, not the marble statue or the painted myth. Imagine Perseus on a quiet shore, his sandals of flight set aside, his sword resting in the sand. The waves lap gently, and Andromeda sits beside him, her hand in his. In such moments, he was not a slayer of monsters or the pawn of prophecy. He was a husband, a son, a man. Danae, his mother, who had once held him in a prison of bronze and wept as they drifted in the sea, now saw him as a king. She lived her days in peace, knowing the gods had preserved her child for greatness. Andromeda, once bound to rock in terror, now walked free, her chains replaced with garlands of love. Together, they raised children, who would carry on their bloodline into kingdoms and stories yet to come. Even the head of Medusa, grim and dreadful, served as a symbol that horror can be overcome, that what once destroyed heroes can be wielded for protection. Perseus did not boast of his trophy. He gave it away, as though acknowledging that no man should keep such a power for himself. In his later years, Perseus must have reflected often on the path he had walked. Few men could claim to have wrestled with destiny so closely. Few could say they had slain monsters with the aid of gods, saved queens from the jaws of the sea, toppled tyrants with justice, and yet also felt the sting of guilt, the ache of exile, the inevitability of prophecy. That duality, glory and grief, was the essence of Perseus. And perhaps it is why his story endured, not as a tale of perfection but as a mirror of humanity's struggle. For Perseus was not flawless. His pride led him into Polydectes' trap. His hand, though unintentional, fulfilled the doom of Acrisius. His courage was balanced by tragedy. But this was the truth of all heroes. They were not gods untouchable, but men made great by the way they bore their burdens. Perseus' final days are shrouded in mist, for myths blur into silence. Some say he died peacefully, ruling Tiryns with Andromeda at his side. Others say he was taken by the gods, lifted into the heavens as the constellation that bears his name. But his legacy was unquestioned. He was remembered as the first of the great monster slayers, a pathbreaker whose courage inspired Heracles, Bellerophon, and countless others. His tale was written in stars, sung in poems, carved in stone. To this day, when the night sky clears, Perseus shines above us. His stars glimmer beside Andromeda's, eternal in their embrace. And when we look upon them, we are reminded not only of gods and monsters, but of a man who carried the weight of destiny and still lived, loved, and rose.